Now we have this list of expenses we can display on the expense list page. So let's open the component. Here we can pass this information to the expense list. So what we need to pass? List of expenses is loading and error. So we can name it is error instead of error because this is a string, or we can keep it same. So instead of error, let's call it error msg. So it's error message. Now we can pass this information to the expense list. Is loading expenses error message. So these things we are passing, but now you can see we are getting error. So on this expense list component, we need to, as we are using TypeScript, we need to mention that this expense list component requires these three props. So let's go inside expense list. Here we can create interface, expense list props. Is loading is a boolean. Then we have expenses, which is list of expense. So we'll add type soon. And now we have is error, which is of type, what was that? It was error message. So error message, it was a type string. Now what will be the type of expenses? So expenses is array. So if you see here, it's an array of objects. So while using TypeScript, you need to specify type of each of these objects. So let's create one file, types.ts, and here we'll define new interface just for that type. So you can say expense. What is expense? Expense has these properties. So it has id which is a number. Now it has expense type. So expense type, which is of string. Then we have expense date, which is also string, and expense amount, string, description, which is also string. So now we need to export this interface so we can use it in another file. So here its type will be array of expenses. So we are importing this expense from these types, and this is how you declare a type with array of expenses. Now expenses is array of expenses. Now we can use this type here, fc, import it from React and specify it here. Now this expense list component requires these three as a mandatory props. While you can see now there is no error. Now we can destructure these properties here, is loading, expenses, and error. Make this bigger, msg. Now let me declare this a class main content, and inside it we'll add h2 expense list, and let me give it a class name of margin y3 and text center. So these are all bootstrap classes. So now we can use, you can see all these structure elements are unused, so you can use it here. So I can say is loading, then display loading message. So it give class name of loading. If there is error message, then display that error message. whatever coming, and I will give it class of error msg. So these classes I have already defined in index. So error hyphen msg, you can see success message, loading, all these are already defined. So we are directly using. Now I want these expenses to be displayed. So let's create a new component inside expense list. I can create expense table dot tsx, and here we can accept those expenses. It's always better to separate out each section in a different component so you can easily test them. So now I can use this expense table component, and for this I will pass these expenses. Now again, inside expense table we need to specify that it requires this prop. So I will declare interface expense table props. Expenses is the only prop, and it will be type will be expense and array. Now we can use it to import this and specify. Now we don't have any error and we are passing expenses. So these expenses we can display here. So let's see the loading functionality. So you can see expenses list is displayed and table is also displayed. So when we refresh, you can see loading is displayed and then you get that table information. Loading and then expense table. So we are able to display this loading message. And error message is also displayed if there is any error. So expense table, now let's display that expense table. So for that we'll use React Bootstrap table. And search for tables. You can see this table looks nice. So I can copy this T head, close this table, and we can import this table. Let's import this table from React Bootstrap. I can also add it responsive. On mobile devices, there will be scroll bar. So what we need, so if you check here, go to dashboard, this is the final application, expense type, date, and this is the number. So here I can say expense type, expense date, then expense amount and description. Amount, description, then we have edit and delete buttons. Edit, delete. And here we will have T body, and inside this body will display those expenses. So let's add a class of heading here. It will be displayed nicely. Heading everywhere, will add that class. Here we can loop through those expenses and display them. So I can say expenses dot map for the individual expense. What will return? Will return a tr. Inside we'll have td. So it will be expense dot so first is the id. So I can index here, index plus 1. Why 1? So index always starts with 0 and we want to display start from 1. So that's why we are using this. So we can also destructure other properties. So let's say Now expense type, so here it will be expense type, so this will be expense dot expense type. But instead of always referring expense, you can destructure here. Expense type, expense amount, expense date. Now we are destructuring, you can directly use. So now it's expense date. Next is expense amount. And then we have description. So let's destructure description also. And we have this edit and delete button. Now let's see how it displays first. So if you go, you can see you are getting this table display. So let's add some CSS here. So for the table, I will give class name of expense-list. And for the individual row TD, I will give expense item. Class name equal to expense item. Let me copy this and I will paste it everywhere. So these classes, for these classes, we can create a new file, expense table.css, and I will add the CSS code here. Now we can import it here. Import dot slash expense table.css. Now if you check, you can see it gets displayed. So we don't have edit and delete buttons, so let's add those buttons first so it will look better. Buttons, so you can use this info button for the edit button. We make this bigger, so it should be inside TD button. Import this from React Bootstrap, and we'll have button for edit delete, so I can say danger. So you can see this button CSS classes is not getting applied. Why that is not getting applied? Because we are not using Bootstrap CSS. So go to main.css. So main.tsx, inside this we have installed Bootstrap and React Bootstrap. So you need to use the base Bootstrap library. So before the index.css, I can import Bootstrap based CSS Bootstrap dot min.css. So this is the base Bootstrap CSS library you need to import if you want to use the Bootstrap classes. So from where this is coming? This is coming from node module. So we have installed the Bootstrap npm package. You can see Bootstrap is installed. So inside node modules you will see a Bootstrap folder. You can see there is Bootstrap dist css and it has lot of files. One of them is minified css. You can see Bootstrap min.css. So always use minified css because it's smaller and it loads quicker instead of using directly bootstrap.css. This is larger file. So if you see, there are total of 12k lines, but if you see the minified css, it's smaller, so it's just 6 lines of code. So it's a compressed file, so it loads faster. So always use minified css. So this will make sure that all the css styling of your application will be correct. So now if you check, you can see you correctly see these all the styles. You correctly get that all the data. These buttons are a bit larger, so let's display them smaller version. So I can say size equal to SM, so it will be smaller. Now you can see these are smaller, so we are correctly getting all this information. So this td index 1, let me remove this expense item from here because that was too large. So now it's displaying correct. So we are successfully able to display list of expenses in this particular table.